Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today, we find ourselves on a space vessel that is bleeding oxygen. As you make repairs, every breath you take brings you one step closer to death. You must work together to restore the power before the air runs out, but hidden among you as loyal friends and crew members are imposters who have infiltrated security and continue to sabotage the ship. Their only goal is to avoid detection and kill the crew by force or by asphyxiation. Can you identify them in time and eliminate the threat? The Menace Among Us is a thrilling, semi-cooperative game of intrigue and survival in deep space. It's for 4 to 8 players, takes 40 to 60 minutes to play, for ages 14 and up, and published by Smirk Dagger Games. Today, we'll be doing a rule school where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Well, without further ado, let's get started. The Menace Among Us is a semi-cooperative game of intrigue and survival in deep space, where you'll have different agendas like being a good crew member or a bad menace. Each player also gets a character, which gives you some special abilities. If you're a good crew member, you're trying to raise the energy to 100% on the ship. But if you're a menace, you're trying to reduce the oxygen on the ship to 0 or kill all the crew members. Each player's agenda tells them how they win, but also has a specific goal that they must complete to win as well in the advanced game, like killing at least one other player even though you're a good guy. Each round, players might be playing cards, which then get shuffled secretly and resolved so nobody knows who played what card for sure, and sometimes it will be good things like moving the energy up. Sometimes it will be bad things like moving the oxygen down or the energy down, and sometimes there's some neutral effects as well. Based on players' actions, you can call for a vote by grabbing the voting pistol, and the one with the most votes flips their agenda over, and if it's a good guy, well, you lose lots of oxygen. But if it's a bad guy, you gain lots of oxygen, so you're trying to exile the bad ones. So let's see if you're cunning enough to win based upon what your secret agendas are. I'm going to show you a method of setting up for the first time you've ever played the game, but it's also going to help you facilitate subsequent plays of the game. First, you're going to find all the below deck actions. On the back of the cards, it says below deck. There's 11 different types of these, like raise morale, advanced repair, and so on and so forth. It's best if you take all of the cards of a certain type and put them in one deck. For instance, this deck has all cards that say raise morale. We do that for all of the 11 cards. Keep in mind that some of the decks are going to be much bigger than others. Next, you're going to find all of the agenda cards. They say agenda on the back side. On the other side of these cards, it's going to have an agenda that will say either menace agenda or crew. One card will actually say neutral agenda. For each of these agendas, you are going to put together a deck of cards based upon those below deck action cards we showed you just previously, and it's going to show you how many of each. Like this one has 6 airlock breaches, 4 explosions, 3 panics, where this one has 6 basic repair, 1 reactor leak, 2 advanced repair, and 4 brawl. So you'll be taking those amount of cards of each type as shown on those agenda cards from the supply that you had already set up. So for example, we'll take the 6 airlock breach cards, the 4 explosions, the 3 panics. We'll shuffle them all together and put them in a deck. So there we have the shuffled deck, and it's best to take this agenda, put it face down like this, and then just put these cards right on it. So if you want to look at this, what agenda it is, it'll show it to you, and all the cards in this deck are just behind it. Then, once you've constructed those decks for each of the agendas, I've placed those decks here on the right side of the insert. So we have all of the crew, or good guys agendas here, and we have the 2 menace and the 1 neutral here. Now before you put the rest of those cards away, you'll create the Emma deck, which is the Emergency Maintenance Assistant. You're going to put the game board in the middle of the table. This actually shows you how the Emma deck is constructed. All of these, 5 basic repair, 4 advanced repair, and so on and so forth. There'll be a total of 20 cards in there. You'll shuffle that deck and place it face down right here. So it will look just like that. Just to the left of that, you see a place for the cards that say wounds. You're going to find all the cards that have that symbol on it. You're going to shuffle them up and place it in the wounds spot. Then you can place the rest of those below the deck action cards and place them in different spots in the insert. So now you have this set up that will help you facilitate setting up this game, but will also help you facilitate future games. Next, we'll finish setting the board up before we get to getting all the players set up with their cards. You're going to take this energy marker and you're going to place it right in this bottom left-hand side of the board, just like that. Next, you're going to take this oxygen marker, the O2 marker, and you'll place it on one of these spots depending on the amount of players, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. So if we're playing a 6-player game, it would start there, for example. And then off to the side of the board, you're going to place the voting pistol, which just has another piece of cardboard that gets assembled so it will stand up, and the mission leader token. Next, we're going to set up the agenda decks for this game. On the left, you'll see a table. Depending on the amount of players, you'll use specific agendas. For example, for 6 players, you'll use 2 Menace agendas. There's only 2 of them. Remember, you've placed them here already. This one says Menace. We'll take this one out. Do not separate out the decks. And this one is Menace right here. We will take that one. Then it says we take the Saint. That's one of the crews, and it says so right here. It says the Saint. We'll take this deck. Again, don't separate out the decks. Keep them intact. Then we're going to take 3 random crew members. If you remember, we put all the crew member decks here. You'll randomly take 3 of those. So all 6 players know that 2 of them are going to be bad, being the Menace, and the other 4 will be the crew, the good guys. So you'll take those decks and place them down just like this. Remember, it has their entire below the deck action deck, but on the bottom of this is their agenda card. Now, you won't show these to anybody. You'll place them down like this, and everyone will close their eyes except one player, and one player will sort of lay them out in an area like this. Then that player that did that will close their eyes, and any other player will open their eyes, and they'll sort of move them around so that nobody knows which deck is where. Then everybody will open their eyes and randomly take a deck. Now, if you remember, each player's deck has one agenda card and the below the deck actions. Each player can look at their own agenda card, the other side, but they won't show it to anybody else. They'll keep this face down in front of them, and the below the deck action deck that they have, they can shuffle it up if they want to make sure it's really randomized from the last play. It's important to note that not even the Menace players will know who the other Menace players are, so no one knows who is on which team. Also, you want to make sure that as soon as you start handling your cards, since they are a completely different assortment from other players, you must keep your hand hidden as well, being careful not to hold your hand where someone might catch a glimpse, as it could give you away. Now, players are going to be able to select a character, but before you do that, you'll want to know the object of the game. In this game, there's 2 sides. The crew, which is the good side, Menace, which is the bad side. The crew is trying to get this energy all the way up to 100%. If they do so, they win. Now, there's also availability to possibly kill other players. If you kill all of the bad guys, the Menaces, then as soon as you get this past this line, the good guys, the crew, will win. Now, the Menaces are trying to get this oxygen depleted all the way down to 0%, or they also win if all of the crew members are killed. Now, what I just described to you are the win conditions in the basic game. However, there's an advanced way to play, and if you're playing with experienced gamers, we recommend you play this even in your first game for the most rich gameplay experience. However, if you're playing with a lot of new gamers that don't play a lot of games like this, then you might want to try the basic version for your first game. Now, for the advanced game, all the crew is going to have their main goal, which we just went over, which was getting that energy all the way to the energy goal, and they're going to have an individual goal, which says, like in this case, the vengeance is complete your primary goal with at least one other player killed. So even though you're good, you're going to try to kill another player. And it could be any player. It could be a Menace, or it could be another crew. So it's going to have you act in a different way than you normally would. However, you as an individual have to have both of these met in order to win, which means sometimes you could be the only player winning. Sometimes there could be multiple players winning. Now, the Menaces, they, again, as I showed you, need to have the oxygen level to 0, but they have no individual goal. So if you're playing with the advanced, which we recommend, you will want to play with this with the individual goals as well. Also, each agenda card has a special ability that are mostly triggered by a specific game event. For example, when you are killed, if you have not been exiled, you may choose a player and that player discards their hand. Or, when you are killed, you may choose another player and that player receives a wound. Now, we'll talk more about exile and wounds and killing later in more detail, but it's very important that a player cannot hint in any way about the special ability they have. For example, if you're the Vengeant and you're about to be killed, you can't say, well, if you kill me, I'll be able to give someone else a wound, and that one would kill that player too. Now that you have your agenda and you know what you need to do in order to win, you'll be selecting a character that you will think will help you achieve those goals. Essentially, this is the first actual game action you will take. Next, you'll take all the character cards that look like this. You will put them face down, which looks like this. You'll shuffle them up and you'll pass 3 out to each player face down. Now, if you're playing with 4 or 5 players, all players will have 3 character cards. If there's any left over, return them to the box unseen. If you're playing 6 to 8 players, the first 5 players will receive 3, any of the additional players won't get any yet, and it doesn't matter which 5 you give them, but just give them in a clockwise order. Now once a player has the 3 character cards, they're going to secretly look at these 3, they're going to choose one of them to keep, and they'll keep it face up just like you see on the table. If you're playing with 4 or 5 players, one of the ones you didn't choose will be flipped over for a player aid, the other one will be removed out of the game. However, if you're playing with 6 or more players like you are here, the 2 that you didn't choose get collected, all of the unchosen ones from all the players get shuffled up, and they get distributed to the other players as evenly as possible, which means some players might have more than 3 to choose from. Then from the unchosen ones, each player will get 1 face down as a player aid. And if there's any remainders, you can put them back in the box, you don't need them. Now when you do select a character, first it will give you 7 more cards. Now this, added with the cards that you've gotten from your agenda, will give you a 20 card deck that's unique every time you play the game. Second, you will have 2 above the deck actions that are unique to this character. Some of these actions are free, but most of them require you to pay a cost, for example, precious resources like oxygen or energy. For example, we have a Menace player here, and they chose the Medical Officer. Now the Officer will give them 5 Raise Morale cards, which are all really good cards. And that gets added to the terrible cards that the Menace agenda has given them. So he can float a few of the good ones out there when he needs to. Also, the Medical Officer has an ability called First Aid. Now that allows him to heal a wound, which is a good thing and you look like a good guy doing it, but as a Menace player, what they really care about is the cost of 2 oxygen, the most precious resource in order to do it. So you always question the motivation behind everything anyone does, and that's what keeps things interesting. Now you'll have a better idea of what these actions do after watching the rest of this video, so feel free to hold off on selecting your characters until then. Once each player has selected a character and shuffled the extra cards that came along with that character into their deck, they will draw 3 cards into their hand as their starting hand. Now those cards that you draw you can look at, but as previously mentioned, don't let anyone else see them. Also give the mission leader token randomly to 1 player. The game is played over multiple rounds. Each round has 3 phases: the action phase, the resolution phase, and the accusation phase. Let's go into these different phases and show you how they work. In the action phase, starting with the mission leader and going clockwise, each player has one of 3 choices. You can either draw a card, play a card, or use an above the deck ability action from your character. Let's go over all these in detail. When you play a below the deck action card, it goes down in front of you face down so no one knows what you've played. Then it'll be the next player's turn. Now a different action, instead of playing a card, is to draw a card. And to do that, you just simply draw the top card off the top of your deck into your hand. You do have a hand limit of 4 cards. If you ever get more than 4 cards when you're drawing your card, you immediately discard a card of your choice to the discard pile. Very important, all cards discarded here for any reason always goes face down. The last possible action you can do on your turn is an above the deck action, and that's using one of the special abilities on your character. We're going to go over how these work in just a moment. So in summary, starting with the mission leader, everyone's either drawing a card, playing a card, or using an above the deck action ability until all the players have done this clockwise from the mission leader. Next, you move on to the resolution phase. The mission leader will take all the cards in front of all the players that played in that round, shuffle them up, and place them in one deck. Now there needs to be at least an amount of cards equal to half of the amount of players. So for example, in a 6-player game, there needs to be at least 3 cards here. In this case, we have 4. If there were not, you would then fill into this from the Emma deck. So let's say, for example, there were only 2 cards. Well, with a 6-player game, you need at least 3 cards. So we would put 1 card from the Emma deck face down here, and then you would shuffle that deck. And we're playing with an odd amount of players. If there's 5 players, you need to have at least 3 cards. If you're playing with 7 players, you need at least 4 cards in the deck. Remember, always giving cards from the Emma deck to reach that amount at least from what all the players threw in. And there's a nice reminder note right on the board telling you how many cards needs to be there and how many would get added by Emma. It's important to know that the Emma deck has also been compromised and has at least one of every terrible card mixed in with all of the good cards she's supposed to be helping with. Now, this means that players avoid playing cards. In order to try and catch a player sabotaging the ship, it provides a degree of plausible deniability that the card may have come indeed from Emma. So players that are the crew need to know that Emma can be a danger to them, and the Menace players need to know that they have some layer of protection playing their cards. So let's say the first card is Raise Morale. This is a good card because it moves oxygen up. Now even though there's 2 arrows here, you just move it once because there's only 1 oxygen icon, so it moves it up. That's good because it's giving oxygen, to the ship. So that's a really good thing. That's why this is a good card. Let's look at this one. This is an Airlock Breach, and it is considered a bad card because it moves oxygen down. So those two essentially sort of cancel each other out this round. Let's say someone played an Advanced Repair card. Now this is a good card because it moves energy up too. However, this has a cost. What this means is that oxygen actually has to go down first. So in this case, this would go down, and then the energy would go up too. Now usually you're just flipping this over in a single deck. I have the cards in the different spots of the board to more easily illustrate how they work. Let's say the last card was an Explosion. It's a bad card and it moves energy down too. Now, so that those sort of cancel each other out. Also, when moving energy up, it says it right here that the energy cannot go up more than 5 increments each resolution phase, which is what we're going through now. And as you resolve each of those cards, you'll put them all face down one at a time in this discard pile. Next, you'd go to the Accusation Phase. We're going to cover this in just a moment because we're going to actually go over the rest of the cards and what they do. So for the basic repair, it would cost 1 oxygen, but energy would go up 1. The command card costs an oxygen, but each crew member gets to draw a below the deck action card from their deck into their hand, making sure that you never go over 4, because if you do, remember you have to discard face down to the discard pile. Now, if you play Replicate, essentially it will replicate the next card played. So let's say the next card is Panic. This one would cost an oxygen, and each crew member discards a random card from their hand. And again, all discards are face down. But it would do this again because of this Replicate card. Once because this was played, but a second time because the Replicate was there. Now, if the Replicate is the last card of the round, the effect carries to the next round, meaning this card stays out, and when the first card from the next round gets revealed, it replicates that. And if it's another Replicate, it just simply doesn't do anything, but that next Replicate that is drawn will replicate the next card. These next cards all cause wounds, so I'm going to go over them at the same time. Each unwounded crew member who played a below the deck action card receives a wound. So what are wounds? Any player that receives a wound takes one of these cards from the top of the deck, puts it in front of them face up. For example, brain damage. This would stay face up and it says, hey, as long as you have this wound, you must repeat the action type of the previous crew member this round, whether they do an above the deck special ability action, a below the deck card play, or a draw, for example. Now, the brawl, the first time each round that this is revealed, the mission leader chooses a crew member and that crew member receives a wound, but this card cannot be replicated. The backstab is the first time each round this is revealed, the mission leader themselves receives a wound, and this cannot be replicated. Now, if you ever get a second wound and you still have that wound at the end of the round, you are killed. Now, during the round, if you get a second wound, certain things that we'll show you later will help you heal a wound. And again, if you heal that before the end of the round, you're not killed. But at the end of the round, if you still have 2, you are killed. Another thing that can kill you is if you have no cards in your draw deck and you have none in your hand, and it's the start of your turn, you're killed then as well. Now, if you're killed, you flip over your agenda card so everyone can see who you were. And then if you were a crew, a good guy, and you're killed, the penalty is oxygen. Because this is red, it means that oxygen will go down 2. So you would immediately affect that on the board. However, if you were a menace, the killed bonus is nothing. Also keep in mind that if you are killed, you still can win if you meet your victory conditions. Now you've seen how all the cards work, and they're all essentially one of 3 types: good, neutral, or bad. And all of this goes into understanding suspicious behavior. Good players are normally going to play a lot of good cards. Bad players will be trying to float the bad cards out in there, but the neutral ones is where things get even more interesting. For example, the brawl and backstab cards wound players, and you'd think only menace players would do that, but you're trying to also kill those menace players, so crew members will be playing them as well, which gives them some suspicion as to why you're playing that card. And the basic repair, you know what? It allows the energy to go up, but it costs an oxygen, and so the menace player thinks that's a good even trade. So it's not quite as good as it seems. And this brings me more to table talk about these cards. Anytime you play a card, you can only say if you've played a good, neutral, or bad card. If you played a Raise Morale, you can't say, hey, no, I played a Raise Morale this round. But you could say I played a good card. Also, if you ever get to see anybody's card, due to some abilities, you can never say exactly what card you've seen. You always just have to use the limitations of good, neutral, or bad. Now we've talked about the action phase and the resolution phase, but before we move to the accusation phase, we've already talked about how the cards work. Let's talk about how the abilities work with the above the deck actions. They are pretty self-explanatory, so we're not going to go over all of them, but some of them do have a cost, and if so, you just pay that. In this case, if you on your turn, you can select to regenerate, you would pay 1 oxygen, meaning the oxygen goes down 1 on the board, and in this case, you could remove a wound from yourself. Hey, we talked about saving yourself, this is the way you do it. You would take this card and just remove it from the game. Or you could deflect. The next time this round a crew member would receive a wound, you may redirect that wound to a different crew member. Now keep in mind, you're only picking possibly one of these and that's your entire turn instead of drawing or playing a card. Now with these ones, this says discard a card. Veto, once per this round, you can and must cancel the cost and effect of a below the deck action card as it's revealed. So as a card gets revealed, you might not want the reactor leak to happen. You could, you've essentially had discarded a card in your turn and you could veto one of these cards, making it not essentially resolve. Or you could spend 2 energy, putting it 2 down on the board, and choose another crew member, and then that crew member receives a wound. And the rest of the abilities are pretty self-explanatory now that you know what the symbols do and whether they cost or not. So after you've gone through the action phase and the resolution phase, we go to the accusation phase. And here's where you just discuss any suspicions, and if someone wants to call a vote to try to exile someone, they essentially would grab this voting pistol and hold it up, and essentially this means that there's going to be a vote. And once someone takes that, it's mandatory a vote has to happen. There could be some final evidence or words of defense, or counter accusations may occur briefly, but essentially pretty closely after someone grabs that, they're going to count down 3, 2, 1, and everyone's going to vote. Now each player can either point at another player or make a fist, which is abstaining. Now, if the player has a majority of the people pointing at them, meaning they voted for them, they are exiled, they must flip their agenda. However, let's say there were 3 people pointing at this one and 2 players abstained and there were players pointing somewhere else. Well, because the most people were pointing at this player, they're exiled. However, let's say there were 3 people pointing at them and 3 people abstaining, and those were the most possibilities there. Then they would not have to be exiled because the abstainings ties the amount of votes. You have to have more votes than any other voted player, or more than the abstaining as well. Now, if you're exiled, you flip this over. If you're a good guy, the crew, the exile penalty is you would lose 3 oxygen, so you must make the oxygen go down on the board by 3. However, if you exiled a menace, a bad person, you actually get a bonus. You'd gain 2 oxygen, putting it up 2 on the board. Now, if a player is exiled, when it's their turn, they cannot take any of these above the deck actions. They can, however, submit cards face down and still, influence the results of the round. They also cannot call for a vote or vote on anybody. Now that you know the ramifications of voting to exile a player, whether they are crew or the menace, it's important to know that doing this too early before you're relatively sure a player is a menace is extremely dangerous. Because if you're wrong, you're going to use 3 oxygen, which is a huge loss in this game. But you also lose a loyal crew member's above the deck actions, as they can no longer use them to help you. And since an exiled player can no longer vote either, then your voting block has grown weaker. But if you are right and it is a menace player, you gain 2 oxygen. And all they can do now is play bad cards from their hand for the rest of the game until, of course, you manage to kill them. Now once the accusation phase is over, by the way, if nobody wants to accuse or do anything, you just simply move to the next round. To move to the next round, you take the mission leader token and you pass it to the next player clockwise, and you start this all over again. Now these rounds will continue until a few possible things happen. If the oxygen ever gets to 0, which is right here, the game ends immediately and the menaces have won. Everyone flips up their agenda cards and sees who won. Also, if all of the crew have been killed, the menaces also win immediately. Now, if at the end of the round the energy is at 100%, then the players that are the crew have the opportunity to win. Meaning, if you're playing the basic game, all the crew win, even if you've died. Otherwise, you must look at your individual goal. In this case, this player had to complete this primary goal, which is having the energy get there, and at least killing one other player. If they did that, then they would win with the crew there. If they did not get their individual goal, even though the energy got here, they wouldn't win in the advanced game. Now, if the menace players are all killed, the menace players can still win by making the oxygen go to 0. However, if they are all killed, the crew can win as long as the energy is past this line, by the end of the round. And again, that's when all the menaces are killed. They just have to have it past this line. But also keep in mind, if you're playing the advanced game, they also have to have completed their primary goal to win on the crew side. Now, speaking of win conditions, there's a role we haven't talked about yet. Normally, there's the crew or the menace. This one is neutral. It's called the coward. It only comes out with 7 or 8 players. Now, by default, they win with the crew if you reach the energy goal. If you're playing the advanced game, you also have to complete this primary goal without being exiled. However, it can flip-flop. Once a menace agenda is revealed, meaning if a bad menace person has to flip over their agenda card, either being killed or exiled, this player then becomes essentially a menace player, which they're trying to win by getting the oxygen level to 0 or killing all the crew, but you would revert back if all menaces are dead. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into the Menace Among Us and get to the fun quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have further questions about the rules, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video, and that's the best place to ask them, since not only will I be notified, but so will Smirk Dagger Games.